Welcome to the SBCA podcast, Component Connection, where we explore the people, ideas, trends, and innovations shaping the structural framing industry. Regardless of how you touch this industry, we're glad you're here. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, my name is Abby Langenberg, the Director of Business Development for SBCA, and I'll be your host for this episode. With me today is Jess Lohse, Executive Director of SBCA, to share highlights from our time at the Innovative Housing Showcase in Washington, D.C. So let's just start right off. For listeners who may not be familiar, can you tell us what the HUD Innovative Housing Showcase is and why SBCA participates in and sponsors the event?
Well, thanks for having me back once again, Abby. I'd almost like specify that who your guest is or something. But yeah, IHS has been a great event for us for the last few years. To kind of give you the brief history of it, it was something that Dr. Ben Carson, when he was the HUD secretary during the first Trump administration, he kind of had this idea for what can we do to showcase innovations in housing. And unfortunately, SBCA, I don't even know if we knew about it, but we certainly didn't participate. But then COVID happened. It went away for a year or two, and it came back under the Biden administration with Secretary Marcia Fudge. And that's when we got involved. We built our first house, really didn't know exactly what to expect. I think we only had one staff person there and really was overwhelmed by just how many people went through the house. So, it's one of those like, let's do it and see what happens. It was like enough to come back for a second year and a third year. And this was our fourth year. So through Secretary Todd, now with Secretary Scott Turner, it's been a great relationship with HUD to be able to showcase, more traditional means of construction compared to some of the other things that are on the mall. But it is one of those that we bring some innovations in our process and just showcasing really how most houses are built, how a lot of buildings are built, and what happens behind the drywall. So overall, it's a great opportunity for us to really showcase what it is that our manufacturers do, our members do, both on the product side, which are the components, but also on the process side, which is the construction of the buildings. And think of what our NFC partners do.
So this year, we brought back the big greenhouse, which is ever growing in popularity. And we did kind of a different design this year. Can you explain what was different about this year's design and how SBCA and our partners teamed up to kind of bring it to life on the National Mall?
So after last year, which I think it was 84 Lumber's first year participating, they came to us and they're like, how do we make this bigger? How do we make it better? And really from there, it was kind of the idea of like, okay, well, why don't we do a duplex? And that's what it was. It was a 3,000 square foot, 2-story duplex, really kind of showcasing that it's not just for the tiny homes or single family homes, which again, you get a lot of consumer driven thought processes at the IHS event. So it's not always people that are fully understanding construction methodologies. So being able to articulate that and show them that there's a flexibility there. We were able to have 2 front doors, 2 staircases, really make it kind of that museum curated experience. We did a great job with our signage to get people around there, understanding the various parts of not only the house and the project there, but also the process that goes into manufacturing components and where that home was going to end up, which was with Habitat for Humanity, an affiliate in Virginia. So it was great to have them there. But really, it comes back to our partners and couldn't have done it without them. Obviously, I mentioned 84 Lumber. They were great for providing the components and the labor. So kind of that turnkey solution. Huber, you mentioned the green. We had the zip system in there. So Huber Engineered Wood Products. That was great to, we've become known of why is this greenhouse being built on the National Mall? And you go on Reddit, some other places, there's all kinds of rabbit holes that conspiracy theories that I guess we kind of are part of, not that any of them are accurate. But also, MyTech does a great job coming alongside us with that signage, really helping us with the event. Simpson Strong Tide put a lot of different connectors and, to be able to build a house on a foundation that needs to be temporary and then take it down and take it to a forever home. A lot of those connections need to be really well thought out. So Simpson does a great job there. Apex, their collection of businesses and, BLET, TDS, they do a great job of making sure that, there's a lot of design considerations. And that might be part of the story we need to tell a little bit better from the architecture of like, okay, there's going to be people that live in this structure. But then beyond that, how do we engineer it to put together temporarily on the National Mall, meet all the requirements that not only HUD, but the Park Service, because there's multiple government agencies going to work at this event. But then where does it go into live its forever place in Virginia? So all of those different considerations and moving, maybe the plan wasn't originally for components, So all of that, the team there did a great job with the engineering, the architecture, the design, the truss design, all of that. And then finally, Greenbush Logistics. 84 does a great job of bringing the product to the mall, but how does it get from the mall through DC, which is not an easy thing to drive tractor trailers through DC and then ultimately to Virginia. So Greenbush did a great job for us again this year. And it's one of those that SBCA does a lot of planning. Our staff is doing a great job. Our membership, our leadership supporting it. But we couldn't do it without any of those folks, as well as our members that come by and really talk about it and make sure that the Innovative Housing Showcase is kind of one of those paramount things that SBCA has been doing the last few years, which it's nice to see. And it's one that, we're gaining that recognition, that notoriety, not just on Reddit, but by people that are active in DC and understand, what's going on there. So it's nice to, that consistency is starting to have an impact.
Yeah. So the big topic of conversation for most of the Innovative Housing Showcase was we built and dried in 3,000 square foot duplex in less than 12 hours. So what does that process look like? And what role did the components play in that ability to go up in 12 hours?
Well, Lil Birdie might have said it might have been around 10, but 10 to 12 is still amazing no matter what. We advertise 12 because we like to underpromise and overdeliver, but it is one of those, it's a lot of building to do in that length of time. So, there's so many things that come into it, but the components really are the star of the show. The 4 cassettes, which they were cassettized, I guess, or panelized to where they get dropped in. Whenever we do Framing the American Dream, time motion studies, or anything else, the 4 cassette is the biggest savings on the job site labor. So that helps out. Beyond that, the wall panels, having those stacked and sorted the way that they need to go up, and that the labor on site with their process understood how they were manufactured at the facility. And then the other cool thing was the roof trusses. They weren't set one by one on the second story. They were actually set off to the side in panels or sections and then craned into place. So, it was one of those, it was real world type stuff. The crane set up in the wrong location, or somebody from, I forget exactly what bureaucracy came by and said, no, the crane can't be there, it needs to be somewhere else. So there was some real world stuff happening, and that still factors into it. I mean, we're not immune to it, not that it was perfect about it, but it is one of those that even with a couple hiccups, we can still produce a very structurally sound building in a timely fashion, and to be able to do that. And kind of to back up, the first thing that, we realized this very quickly on site, 4 years ago, the National Mall, and that's, if you're not familiar, it's the area between the Capitol building and the Washington Monument, the big grassy place. Martin Luther King had some amazing speeches there. I mean, it's been a gathering point for Americans for, 250 years, or I'm not sure exactly when it was built, but we're celebrating 250 for America. So a lot of things have happened there. But you think of the gravel sections of it, and it looks nice and flat on the videos and the cameras and the pictures, but it is not flat. It's like 10 inches of drainage from one end of a 40-foot house to another, and that has to be accounted for. So that takes a little bit of back to that design, the aspects of it and the planning. So this year we used some screw jacks to level up some LVLs to then put the floor cassettes on. So that's a little bit of the inside baseball, but you show up and you're like, oh yeah, of course the building site's going to be perfectly flat. Well, it isn't. And the other thing is the National Park Service is very serious about any kind of digging on any of their national parks, especially the National Mall. So that was a non-starter with them either for the anchorage and making sure that we've got some sort of a foundation. So interesting problems that come about that not everybody gets to hear about or know about till now, because everybody's going to listen to this, right?
Exactly. So as we're not in a bubble of a case study, we're in real life. We are talking to real consumers. So what's the biggest difference between framing with components versus traditional stick framing versus other exhibitors they might see at this event that attendees were able to see firsthand?
So the biggest difference between components and probably stick framing, it's speed, it's accuracy, it's quality, it's really everything. And I'll just, a quick comparison is you think of how accurate the best person is with a skill saw or circular saw. There's going to be some variability there. You compare that. I'm talking about people that have operated them for 20, 30 years in some cases that are just absolute pros at framing. But you compare that accuracy versus the accuracy of any of the saws that are going to be on display at BCMC. And really, there's no comparison. I mean, the computerized, the machining, the tooling that goes into each one of those saws. So you start with like your raw lumber, which isn't going to be perfect, but it is one that, your cuts afterwards are going to be about as perfect as they can possibly be. So you start there and you add it all up through the manufacturing process and the ability to go through and build a wall, build the floor, build the roof trusses. That's where comparing it to stick framing, the more I look at it and the more I compare, and we did this at the Framing the American Dream in Austin last year, there really is no comparison. I mean, yes, you get a house at the end of it. The quality really is two different things. And builders should really care about that because it's going to be air leakage. It's going to be how well can they insulate it, how structurally sound. Even things like if your rough openings are off a little bit, what is the cost of that one window that's a mistake? Or if you're in a multifamily and the rough openings are off tens or hundreds of times, those are things that are big problems. But the accuracy and really the ability to have as specified structural framing is so much better, and that ability to do that with the component solution is great. Now, kind of the other part of your question, compared to what they're seeing there, and that's really where the consumer comes in. Most people that I've found out in the 4 years of doing this, they don't understand what's going on behind the drywall, whether it's up or down or even below the carpet, below their feet. And that's fine. They don't need to. They just want it to work. And that, first and foremost, components allow it to work that much better and easier. But they're going from exhibit to exhibit, and some of them are 3D printing houses or huts, or providing what I like to draw the difference between is what is shelter and what is a house that you want to live your life in. And a lot of places, a lot of things they're showcasing ways to provide shelter. Some you could live in, some that they need a lot of repetition to make work. And, the American spirit wants something that is their own, that they can personalize, whether it's paint colors or moving a wall or something that is uniquely theirs in their house. And it's kind of a nesting effect that people go through and to make it their own. And whether it's good or bad or otherwise, and we have cable television networks and shows dedicated to tearing apart pallets and putting them on a wall. And that's your stamp on your house. So I think that's one thing that people don't fully understand that are going through that is how the American consumer wants something that is uniquely theirs. Whereas a lot of things that happen at IHS, they're meant to provide shelter, which has its place and has its needs and fulfills that. But it's one of those that, there's innovations up and down the mall, and, some of them might catch on. Some might just provide a little bit of a niche service, and some might be for after a disaster or, a very specific need. Whereas we're kind of more that macro, like this is available everywhere. We show a map of all of our component manufacturing locations, member and non-member, to give them an illustration of this is something that's available nationally. And we're able to produce these components in some way, shape, or form everywhere. And that really is one of the points that I think is starting to hit home with HUD, that, it's not just something that's going to happen here, or you need literally 1,000 modular manufacturers to have modular have a footprint. We've got 1,300 component manufacturing locations, and they have more last mile challenges than what components do. So it's one of those that the scale of the component industry, I think, is lost on a lot of people, but we are able to talk about that, illustrate that, and show it that this isn't just one that's available in a neighborhood. This is available for everybody everywhere in the country.
Absolutely. So moving to what happened in the house during the event. So who visited our house? Were there any memorable conversations with policymakers or builders or members of the public that stood out to you?
The way you said it made it sound like there's some kind of a scandalous, like, oh my God, this happened at the house. But as far as I know, it was a perfectly normal interactions with everybody that came through. There were so many different individuals, and we did have a lot of consumers. But this year it moved from kind of that first week of June timeframe to September, right after Labor Day. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, made for more pointed conversations. It might not have been as many people volume-wise, but a better selection of people. And really, what we want to do when we're in DC is get ahead of the policy, get in front of the policymakers, show, the lawmakers, the staff of the lawmakers, the HUD officials, other agencies. I know we had Department of Labor, SBA, all kinds of different folks come through the house to where, even some other, ICC, they were a co-sponsor along with SBCA, having their folks in, Home Depot was there, as well as the Manufactured Housing Institute were, I think, the 4 sponsors. But having those folks, and I know some staffers at NHB, they came through, which was great to see them. Just, you kind of develop friendships with them. So it was good to see them. But at the same time, it's it's good for them to see what we're doing too and what we're capable of, because home builders, they need to understand components as well. So had a ton of great people come through. Secretary Turner spent a lot of time there. He did a news hit, so he was interviewed there. We had some video of him and I going through the house and talking about that you can probably find on social. But he really brought his attention to the showcase. In years past, I didn't quite see that from the secretaries, but it was one that he was very invested in. He spent some time at our structure, at our house, to learn about it, and some good stories that came out of that. So I think he cares, he understands it a little bit better. And in his world, he's thinking modular or manufactured housing. He doesn't quite understand the componentized approach that is very flexible. So hopefully we made some strides there and some different things to talk about that as well.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about the general public who kind of attended and walked through the house, whether they were on their lunch break and they work in the area or they were on their jog. We always get the joggers going through the National Mall. I think what really stood out was that people are interested in what we're doing. Like, we on the National Mall are obviously very visible with the 2-story greenhouse. And because it's put up so quickly, people were there one day and then they come back on the Thursday or Friday. They were just there on Tuesday. There wasn't a house. They're there on Thursday. There is a house now. And they're kind of thinking, what is up with this? And they come into the house and get to learn a little bit more about components. So what was the reaction that you saw from people who maybe had never seen components before, thought it was just a traditional build? What kind of conversations were you able to have in the house with those kinds of attendees?
Well, for people that jog like every day of the week, they probably got a much better show to see how it came together over a few days in the event, and they understood it. But if you're only jogging 2 or 3 days a week on the National Mall, which America is in a very good spot based on the people you see jogging on the National Mall. I mean, there are some athletic folks in Washington, D.C., and they don't mind showing it off. But, for those that did come through the house and they took a break or they stopped in, just happened to be passing by, a lot of the exhibits at IHS come in on trailers. And obviously ours comes in a trailer, but it's all panelized in some way, shape, or form. It comes off the trailer and then it builds a structure. The trailers go away, whereas some of the others, they don't. They stay on the whole time. So that's the first part of kind of getting them in a mindset that this is a home that could be built in any subdivision in America, and typically is. And that's where, they don't fully understand that, you're kind of the incumbent, the status quo. But the point is that not all houses are built as quickly or as efficiently as the one that we showcase. So that's where the true innovation comes back to the process. And that's where our framers who are involved in our NFC members and people that want to build efficiently or be able to build that much quicker are able to do that with components. And the less time equals the less amount of money that's going to go into that project, whether it's carrying costs from all the finances and all of that, or it's just the labor. And being able to better utilize that skilled labor is an advantage of components that other solutions simply don't have. So, people, they don't fully understand it. They think it's a kit or they think it's something that's standardized. And that's one of our hard questions is yes, you can standardize it if you wanted to and have 4 models that you build wherever, or you can make it whatever size you want. And that's the cool thing about components is it's manufacturing, but it's customized to exactly what the needs are for whether it's a lot specific requirement or a builder specific requirement or the homeowner, whatever they need to do, it can be customized. And that's different from what a lot of the other exhibitors are trying to do. They want to standardize their product to where they can build the same thing tens or hundreds of times, whereas we're building literally thousands, if not millions of these structures, over time that are customized to whatever they need to be. And that's the beauty of components that we probably haven't articulated is, yes, we are building these pieces that are going to go into construction much more quicker than what the alternative would be of just stick framing. But it is have that flexibility that other solutions simply can't if they're going to have any sort of scale.
Were there any surprising questions or misconceptions that you kind of encountered during the event or that anybody asked you?
Me personally, I was not asked this question. I think it was Molly or it might have even been you, but asked if the house was 3D printed. And you can see all the wood. And if you've been to a lumberyard, you understand. When Molly relayed that question to me in text message, I was like, well, it was 3D printed in the forest. It was the tree. They kind of did that. But it's a great illustration of where the consumer's mind is at. They've heard about 3D printing, they've heard about all these technologies and AI and all these other things. And it's one of those that we haven't been vocal about our process or what components are or how we do it enough to the point that they're not going to the other exhibitors or the other solutions and saying, is this house componentized? And that's where we've got to get much more better and vocal about what components are, what they do, their capabilities, to where that is the status quo, the incumbent of where, okay, this is the blue ribbon model of how a home should be built. Now, while we believe that, and it certainly is the best way to frame, we're not articulating that. We're not selling that strong enough. And that isn't just an SBCA thing. Obviously, we need to lead the charge and we need to take ownership of that. But it's each and every one of our members talking about the benefits of components and being, acting as if it is the best way, because it truly is. And that's where we've got to get much better as an industry articulating that. And, it is interesting to say, okay, well, it was not 3D printed, it was actually built, but it is one of those, that's where their mindset is at. And if the consumer is going to care about how their house is built, which will hopefully drive sales for new houses, that will drive builders to use more components, there is a consumer pull-through effect or the potential for that. Now, that's probably going to be minimal compared to, if it's the that makes the decision on the component or the specifier. But those are steps that SBCA is taking to try to address those things, on a more macro level. But it's a great illustration kind of a tongue-in-cheek question that, shows us that, we do have an issue here as an industry. We need to be better about talking about how components are utilized, what they are, and why simply they're a better way to go about framing your projects.
Yeah, I think that brings about a great point for our general consumer that's coming through the house. Their key things are availability, affordability, and accessibility. So how does building with components tie into addressing those concerns in the midst of a housing crisis?
Well, you think about the accessibility, and again, we point to that 1,300 number often, and, there are a ton of dots on our national map on the east, and they get a little bit more sparse as you get west and a little north, but those folks will deliver. And, we've had coverage maps kind of like the cell phones in the past at IHS that showcase that, we're available everywhere. So the accessibility, the availability is one of those. I think where people get a little confused is knowing, and we need to do a better job about this at SBCA, of what components are available from what manufacturers. We have manufacturers that all they want to do is roof trusses, and that's where their bread and butter is going to feed them day in and day out. And then there's some that'll do floor trusses, but not floor cassettes, and some that'll do wall panels, but not. And so we need to be able to articulate that to the specifiers. And Home Innovation Research Lab presented some data at our June OQM, and ironically in DC, that a lot of builders don't want to engage in an opportunity or a solution if they have only one supplier for that solution. So that's where, kind of the rising tide is going to lift all boats here. The more component manufacturers get into other component lines, I think the more adoption you'll see from builders, because they don't want to be held to just one supplier, which I get it. I understand that. But it is one of those that our component manufacturers need to be able to articulate that a little bit better. As far as the affordability, I mean, we showed that duplex was, I think it was about $15,000 cheaper. And that was without trying to put a finger on the scale of comparing. And it really comes down to that time. Like, the more that we can leverage the existing, what skilled labor we have still in our markets. I mean, skilled labor is disappearing all the time, and it's a struggle for everybody in construction. But the more we can utilize that with the manufactured labor and the manufacturing processes, the more efficient it's going to be. And that's going to lead to affordability, presumably. That ultimately is going to be up to the builder. But as they face competition from fewer home buyers or more builders trying to supply a similar amount of houses to fewer people that can afford housing, that's where they need to get a little bit more aggressive with their pricing. And hopefully that free market will allow that to happen. But the affordability, the accessibility, the availability, that's really where it comes into. Components are a great solution for that. If a project's going to be built, they need to look at components and try to rule them out as opposed to try to rule them in.
Right. So why is it important for SBCA to showcase components and these construction methods on a national stage like the Innovative Housing Showcase?
Well, for the HUD of my childhood, I think would probably be something that's inner city, low income, housing for people that just have no other options. And over the last 5 years, it's been exacerbated, but it's probably been going on since the Great Recession. So let's go back 15 years, maybe longer. And housing has become an everybody problem. Unless you were like high class, first class, you've got money that you don't care about. Housing's an issue. Financing housing is an issue. And that's one to where it's become a middle class and low class. It's an everybody problem. And I think HUD is starting to realize that. What I worry about is the government getting engaged in certain industries in certain ways. We've seen this in the energy sector the last, I don't know, let's say 10, 12, 15 years as well. And what they can do to what they think might be helping or what they might be doing for whatever purpose, but they can have an impact. And if the government's going to get involved in the housing industry and construction in some way, shape, or form, I want components to be part of that conversation to where hopefully they allow markets to play out. Hopefully they can influence the local municipalities to not try to finance absolutely every want and need off of the backs of development. But it is one of those that hopefully we're able to be part of that conversation, and we need to be front and center to be able to do that. So that said, it is one of those that components offer a solution, but it is one of those that we have a ton of information in this industry that we can share with those policymakers at every step of the way. And really, I want them to think of us as a resource that, yes, we might be a little biased, but I think we can at least provide them the perspective is compared to, I talk about the easy button often, and there is no easy button in housing, but everybody wants one. They think, oh, 3D printing or, oh, this solution or that. And I'm trying not to disparage anybody because there are some real solutions out there, but it is one of those that they think that we can take this one little thing that's going to be like an iPhone and fits in your pocket and it's going to solve everybody's housing needs, when in reality, it's an all of the above. It's going to take everybody working together and really working to figure out what it is that we can go back to that availability, affordability, and really it's going to take some accountability in there as well to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're able to drive housing in a place to where people can now afford it. And some of that is on the supply side, some of that's on the regulatory side, and some of it's probably going to be on the affordability of driving some wage increases as well to where people can afford it. So it's all kinds of things. We need to be part of that conversation and to make sure that first we're not being harmed. And I don't want component manufacturers to be put at a disadvantage because the government goes off and does something recommended or not recommended or whatever it might be. But if there's an advantage that component manufacturers can gain by being engaged with the process, I think that's a good reason for SBCA to be there as well.
Absolutely. So one thing that I took away from this year's showcase, I was really encouraged by the knowledge of the general building industry from our attendees that we saw come through the house, and that everybody was so curious about what made our house different. What was one thing that you took away from being part of this year's showcase?
A couple things is I hammered home the point of the process. Like, yes, the products are there, and construction industries had an infatuation with products forever. I mean, look at how houses were built in the 80s compared to today. Yes, they're better now and that, but it's product, not enough attention on the process. So that's what I'm trying to do. Hopefully people kind of understand that and will add their voice to it as well, because the process makes as big a difference as the product. But as far as, being in DC and being on the National Mall, talking with Secretary Turner, his staff, his deputy secretaries, I'm left with a sense of optimism about housing and engaging in DC. And I was probably one of those pessimistic, I can't get nothing done in DC type folks, but I actually held the door for a senator last week, so I got something done and I feel very proud about that. But it is those that as we go through this and, we need to be engaged, and the more I'm engaged and see SBCA getting engaged, I'm left with some optimism. Now, what actually gets done will be yet to be seen, but it is one of those that I think that there's a pathway forward, and housing is a serious enough issue for everybody. It's an everybody problem. So hopefully we have an everybody solution. And one of those that, other things can be very partisan, but I think housing is one that when I talk to people on the Democrat side or the left side or the right side with the Republicans, they're not that far away. I just don't know who's going to be that person to bridge the gap. And, obviously the media and those will try to drive wedges in it. But I think that optimism is still there from when we were there in June, and seeing SBCA being recognized, whether it's with our house on the National Mall or our efforts with lawmakers that are close to housing. I think we've got an opportunity here to be part of that conversation, and it's worth our efforts. So I'm still very optimistic after being in DC this time as I was last time too, which is a little bit of a change for me personally.
Well, I think that's a great point for everybody to hear, especially as we move into, what's next for SBCA and looking at that next step of advocacy for our organization. So thank you all for listening to SBCA's podcast, Component Connection. If you enjoyed this episode, found it valuable, please like and share it with other people, and stay up to date and in the know by subscribing to Component Connection on whatever podcast platform you use. Thank you for being here, Jess.
Thanks, Abby. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Component Connection, brought to you by SBCA. If there's a topic you'd like us to explore in a future episode, email us at podcast@sbcacomponents.com.